Hello. Didn't have anything better to do again, huh? Well, welcome to my cellar. I've got a rant. I call it a rant. We'll see. More like an Andy Rooney, but I'm saving it for the end. And this one looks like it'll be a little longer than the last one. Many more things to address. Okay, we'll start off with this. Thanks so much for your ongoing talks about the reality of the early days of D&D. It's so good to have an auto-reactive contradiction to the many self-appointed rules lawyers type who are, more often than not, mostly just trying to shout over their players rather than collaborate to have fun. Cogent observation. Alright, next question. One question I've always wondered about, why do the artifacts in the DMG have so many malevolent effects attached to them? I can understand the Wand of Orcus having some serious curse, but why would other, more good-aligned artifacts and relics have such serious side effects? Well, that goes to one of the basic premises of role-playing game, risk and reward. Countless stories, and this is where this all comes from, fantasy and imagination. Countless stories speak to the effects of prolonged magic use on the wielder. They become weazened and shrunken, or they become mad, or whatever. That's a danger of wielding magic by itself. Risk and reward comes into here because if you're going to get a really keno wand that does something really spiffy, well, you don't just get to do neat things with it all the time. Maybe something bad will happen, and perhaps it makes the players not take so much for granted. But it basically boils down to risk and reward. If you're going to wield arcane powers, then you have to expose yourself to the possible effects thereof. Nothing comes without a price. I could probably go on naming platitudes, but that's basically what it is. There's no free lunch. Nobody has a lifetime Metro Pass. Well, maybe an eternity-long Metro Pass, if you will. Just a minute. That's why, in my opinion, that's why. Okay. See, the top half of this page has part of the rant. The bottom half of the rant. But after I'd printed out all 6 pages, I decided I wasn't going to do it again. Okay. So, I've been playing D&D since 3.5. Oh, that recently. Got it for Christmas from my aunt when I was 12 or 13. I played all the editions that were released since, but thought you and a few other channels I've been looking into, through you and a few other channels I've been looking into OD&D and Basic primarily, as they have caught my imagination greatly as I'm looking to tone down all the craziness that has become modern D&D. Well, very perceptive of you. I salute you. My question is, do you have any tips for a DM who has come from a very roll this culture of groups that wants to jump into the basic as a player or a DM? I feel like I'm going to be a fish out of water to a point, but I really want to delve into the old school. Now, this one was immediately followed with a couple of very good suggestions. And the first one was, I'd highly recommend A Quick Primer for the Old School Gaming by Matt Finch. Matt Finch has got as good a take on old school gaming as anyone I know. His Osric stuff is amazing, and I wrote the intro to one of the editions of Swords and Wizardry. So, he's got a good handle on it. And then somebody else suggested Principia Apocrypha by Ben Milton and Steve Lumpkin, and they say it might be a bit more up to date. And one of the people has a YouTube channel called The Questing Beast. Okay, those are two excellent sources. I can't give you anything better off the top of my head. As far as getting players in the playing mode of old school, mum's the word. Don't give away any valuable information. Make them look, make them ask, make them search. Make them ponder, make them puzzle. Don't give away anything. Risk and reward, risk and reward. That would be the first thing I would say for someone coming from the later editions back to the old school. All right, now we have a very a lengthy but well worth reading, I believe, response to my topic of the erosion of trust. I think one of the big things with the erosion of trust is the shift of the perceived job of game master as a storyteller instead of being a referee. Outstanding point. The DM's just there to roll dice and determine what your dice do or don't do for you. That's the ideal. When the DM was a referee, they were impartial. It wasn't their job to ensure anything happened, but rather the events of the happening occurred in a rational way that followed any extant rules or relied on the DM to make rulings based on what they imagined made the most sense. Yes. Nowadays, the onus on the DM is to be a storyteller, to come to the table with 500 pages of world backstory, 300 pages of story for the characters to partake in. No longer is the DM the ultimate arbiter of the rules, but is he's now my bad. Rather, the arbiter of the more nebulous story. The DM should ensure certain events happen, even if they have to bend over backwards to make them happen, and this is where friction sets in. It makes players feel like their actions have no impact on the game, and that the story will occur with or without their consent. So they bucket the system and try to grasp at the straws of rules to ensure that they're trying to do can and must happen in the rules of the game. There's been a little bit of a push for DMs to return to the role of referee, but as long as the D&D based entertainment exists, people will want their DMs to be a storyteller first and will continue to perpetuate their own misery at not being able to affect the game they're playing. Very perspective. Having that trouble tonight. Must be all that snow on the ground outside. Very unusual for us. Very perceptive. You're right. The DM should not come to the table to start a new campaign with more than about 2 pages of notes and maybe a 1-page handout just briefing the players on where they are, what the name of the world is, stuff like that. 1 page. And then the players, in conjunction with the game master, DM, lore master, choose your name, create the story together. The DM is not the author. The players are. The DM is the editor. And if he's good and has a gentle hand at editing, it'll go smooth as silk. DM's not the sage spinning tales for a hank of a chunk of beef around the fire at night. All right. someone else makes the point that think about retreating, using caltrops, taking parting shots. The point being, get the hell out of there. A bag of caltrops, everybody carrying 4 or 5, 6 caltrops in their possibles bag, their utilitarian pouch. Great thing for slowing down pursuit is dropping a few of those along the way. Only takes 1 or 2 of the pursuers to step on one and holler ouch, and it will disrupt at the very least the pursuing party. Okay, hello Tim. I was wondering if you could answer a few questions for me. First, who was the first person to invent or got the idea to use Dungeon Master screen? Most searching the internet mainly talks about the first officially published one, but not who came up with the idea to start using them. I believe Gary recommended it to me in the winter of 74, 75, shortly after I had started the campaign in Carbondale, and I had bought Wilderness Survival and realized I didn't really need it, didn't want it really. I wanted to, everything was underground and overland, but not mega overland. Not macro overland. I don't know who thought of it first. I think it was Gary that told me. I might have just set that board up because I always took the board with me. I might have just set it up one day so I could put my papers behind it. I wasn't worried about the dice rolls. I was worried about my maps. So I don't know. I imagine a whole bunch of guys did. It's as an expediency. One person that invented it? Nah. I certainly don't know who it is. Second, what is your opinion on the evolution of the art for the bulette? Do you prefer the older designs, or do you like the more newer variations it's been drawn and painted over the years? I'm perfectly okay with the evolution of the bulette. Dieter Lisi's version is just so cool. I have a copy of the miniature, and was given to a painter friend of mine before the pandemic, so it's not been returned to me yet, so I don't know. I may have to paint one of my own. I wasn't painting at the time that I gave it to her, but I think it's okay. What I think is funny is the variations of what is actually a bulette that some companies have made that aren't called bulette because they didn't want to get into OGL and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, bulette's not on the can't use list. I own it, and I don't care who uses it. I think it's pretty cool. I don't care if people want to spin off and make it an alternate reality for bulettes. I once half wrote up a story in my head about a crazy guy that actually befriended a bunch of newly hatched bulettes who didn't have a mother or father, and he was shipwrecked on the island, yada da 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 da, and crossbred them over the decades and came up with all these different colored variations that all had an individual unique power. So, it's evolution. It's fine. Bones, Reaper, has something that's all they did was basically change the tail. And that's great. It's fine. I'm going with it. I'm just glad to have put it out there. And I get great pride when I sit back and think of all the sphincters it's made to pucker. All right. All right. I have a bit of a different observation on the DM versus player mentality and rules lawyers. Overall, most of the problems I've personally had with this come from childhood. As an adult, I experienced way less of this regardless of edition. It was my experience that 3 onward gave a lot more power to the players to control the flow of the game. Many places in AD&D where a DM would be forced to make a ruling were spilled out in way more detail of what exactly is possible, skills, feats, etc. An inexperienced DM can run with WotC D&D rules as written and hardly ever need to actually make a ruling that could be debated. That being said, making skills and abilities overly specific makes it more difficult for a DM to make a logic-based ruling against what the rules say without pushback. Again, less so as an adult, I'd say. Overall, I'd say AD&D and the old school games in general are much more dependent upon the quality of your DM, while newer games hardly need one. I think this might have something to do with the trust among newer players and their DMs. Just my opinion, but does that make any sense? As always, thanks for the videos. Yeah, you make a couple of interesting points in there. Certainly, the majority of 5e players that consider themselves to be a DM and are within the context of 5e would be hopelessly floundering and adrift if asked to go back and even be handed a copy of the G series. I'll even give them first edition. I won't make them struggle through OD&D. I'll give them first edition. They'd be hard-pressed to run that adventure because it relies too much on their input. Everything isn't spelled out. Good observation. One of the series of articles which you ran during your time at the Dragon was in Minarian Legends, a series supporting the game Divine Right and written by the game designer Glenn Rahman. It remains a cult classic to this day. Oh yeah, it certainly does. Gary Con. There's somebody that brings up this big oversized plywood board and it has all these magnificent counters and it's all fully painted and or is that Kingmaker? I don't know, it's one of the two. I might be Kingmaker, come to think of it. But in any event, I know it gets played at GaryCon. Alright, where'd I go? I digressed. Clearly it was one of the more immersive fantasy games, though perhaps sales did not live up to potential. What were your thoughts on the Divine Right game and how was it perceived at TSR in its day? We were trying so hard to get the buying public to understand that we didn't just do D&D. We had other games. Some of them were less successful than others. Divine Right would be one of them, and that's a shame because it was a very solid game. At the time, most fantasy was focused inward into parties of 6 or 8 and levels of dungeons and not into worlds or even continents with perhaps interlocking or antagonistic relationships between various political entities. It's a shame. It's a very, very good game. Now, when it came in to the company, I was not involved with its reception or induction into the, let's scrutinize it. And kept hearing several people who I knew were, testing a new game, going on and on about it and how good it was and how much fun it was. And It was Divine Right. I think I may have played in 2 games at the shop is all. Again, at this point in time, I was periodicals. I had plenty of stuff on my own plate. It was perceived as being a really good game, or we wouldn't have put in the resources to publish it. We wouldn't have spent the time to play test it, and we did. We being the company, me only a little, but we did. This apparently is a response to my assessment of critical fails. If you injure yourself 1 out of every 20 sword soaks, stop using a sword. If your bowstring breaks 5% of the time, throw it away and get a new one. Yeah, okay, yeah. That's a great argument for, you don't need that. And that prompted a couple of replies. But wait until you're out of danger first, right? Next reply. I think at that point you're already in danger. What with a sword that stabs you and a broken bow? Your best point at this point is surrender. Yeah, that sounds pretty much. Of course, if you're fighting against something like a Rakshasa or something, I am not sure if they understand the concept of surrender. All right, this is a long one. A bunch of different things in it. What is the longest gaming session you've ever played for? I used to routinely run 8-hour continuous sessions with just a break for lunch. I have run one, I think, that we had to move where we were to my house. I think that ran 11 hours, one continuous session. Do people play for 24 hours in a row? They certainly do. And I imagine one of those places you might find, I'm guessing that the nuclear subfleet in the U.S. Navy still has D&D sets aboard every single submarine as they used to. And I'm sure that you would find people more than willing to play for 24 hours. Of course, the on-off duty section makes it hard, but you understand my drift. And a follow-up on that, and what must that do to people's heads? Well, they might just burst from pleasure and joy. I don't know. New question. Do bards weaponize music and singing? Can a bard attack goblins with a song? Okay. There's some interpretations need to be made here. I don't deal with evil bards. I assume bards to be neutral most of the time with good leaning tendencies. Again, sure there's others, but if I were running a campaign, there wouldn't be. You can certainly call it weaponizing if in the instance of an immediate attack, you could whip a tune out there that would pacify, soothe the savage breast. That I guess could be called a weapon. If you had found, golden records, a song that was really, really good at doing something, maybe passed down, maybe found in the ruins, whatever, new music to learn as a bard, you could possibly weaponize it. Now, if you call trying to charm or sleep weaponizing, certainly you could try to charm those orcs. I have a little trouble picturing an orc bending his throat around, singing a human bard, or any kind of bard that's, humanoid based, wrapping their throat around the language of the orcs to be able to sing them a lullaby. But hey, that could be some really neat thing you find, an orcish lullaby. With just 4 bars, they'll begin to grow drowsy. Hey, a whole new idea for magic stuff. Songs. Hit parade. Can a bard... No. What is the physics of magic? All right. I'm going to answer the next one first. Are you going to contribute to Scientific Barbarian regularly? Only when Jim finds himself in a pinch and needs something to fill in right away. I was very delighted to help him get it off the ground, and now he has lots and lots of eager contributors. Okay, back to the other. Who came up with the first spell? I don't know. This is fantasy. Fantasy. Fantasy fades into obscurity. Okay? Conan, born a babe in the north, in the cold and frozen north, with their set of superstitions, beliefs, Crom, the crazy wizard that he meets, whose form of magic is writing sigils all over the person's body and uttering chants and whatever. I don't know. Does it matter? Magic's magic. In the Dying Earth, magic is a remnant of a previous civilization, society, existence. Nobody knows exactly what it is. They know if they manage to memorize those sounds and gestures and utter them in the correct fashion, something will happen. There's a lot of really good fantasy authors, especially a lot of the older ones, that deal with magic. Magic is part alchemy, part chemistry. Studying ancient lore, reading stuff that went before. Who needs, not much offense intended, why do you need, who needs to, it works that way. That's all you need to know. That's the way it works. If you, no, okay, we'll end on that one. Okay, not going to deny that there are antagonistic players, and I've experienced that myself, especially when I was younger. But these days, I at least thankfully seem to have thoughtful and understanding players who see me as impartial and fair, even when their PCs die. Maybe I'm just lucky, maybe it's the fact that we're all a bit older and more emotionally mature, though some of my best games have been with high school kids. A couple of my best games in the last couple of years were a pair of 10 and 12 or 11 and 12-year-old brothers. Lunatics. Wonderful lunatics from Ireland. In Ireland, we were Zooming. Or Discording or whatever. Anyway, yeah, that's a good point. Older, more mature players, number one, don't get so involved, wrapped up in the character, and number two, feel a lot less need to argue about fine points. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I tend to get players who've never played before and thus haven't been inculcated into an adversarial gaming culture. Also, I think taking reports from Facebook or anywhere online really probably produces a selection biased toward the worst of the worst interactions, where disagreeable and argumentative voices are amplified. Very good point. Very good point. Facebook can be useful, but not if you're looking to find out what to think. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking with so-and-so's comment that it might be a problem with mid-experienced players rather than newbies or more mature players. Played a game recently with all young'uns but me and the DM. 3 teen boys, 2 teen girls, all just a bit into their teens. Only one of them was critical of the DM's prep and approach to the game. He, of course, had a petulance that was coming out of social naivete, I think. I had the DM's back saying, house rules, trumpet rules is writ. Wasn't a big problem, but it might have been something the DM had to deal with if I hadn't been there. Yeah, a lot of DMs don't want to be the hard guy, but hey, you're the umpire, you're the referee. Rules are rules, rulings are rulings, and there's no appeal. Can characters with 18 strength kick rocks like soccer balls? It would be similar to hill giants throwing them, but with less accuracy for kicking. Well, this one drew a couple 3 answers that I didn't feel the need to go over here, because my original answer is going to be the same. Certainly they can kick them. They can try to bend it like Beckham. However, there's going to be anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks of healing that shattered foot. 18 strength doesn't give you thicker skin, tougher skin, harder to cut skin. It's about the musculature. Basically, it means you can deadlift 180 pounds. And then when you get into the 18 do-do-do-dos, it goes up from there. Doesn't have any... You might be able to leg lift more, but kick a rock like a soccer ball? No. I think any 18 strength player that tried to do that would attract bad attention from all around as they lay there on the ground screaming and moaning from their shattered foot. Okay. Now this response is from the author of the Duck Quest, which I've spoken about a couple times now, and how I love the concept of the game, but relying so much on trust as it does, it would be problematic for a lot of people. The concept of trust and rules lawyers are my bane. Lawyers are always booted from my games. My groups play for fun. One group has run for 20 plus years. As a DM, I do hide the dice I roll. My players trust me and know that sometimes I fudge in their favor. I too trust them when they roll as if they cheat themselves. Perfect. That's the way I run all my online games. They like this. The Nat 20 and 1 work well for us. If it works for you, great. Heroes often cheer when they cut a foe's arm off, and laugh as their sword slides across the floor when it slips out of their hand. My PCs still talk about some of the outcomes. Some of the outcomes 18 and 20s. So for us, they work. Okay. And that's great. And like I said, I'd love to run a game of Duck Quest, and I probably have about 5 or 6 players that I could probably run one with, because they're not serious role players. They're gamers that like to have fun. Okay, here's a long one. At 20 minutes, you get philosophical, and for the most part, I agree with you about the conundrum of players versus dungeon master, game master. Okay. If the game, D&D or any other role-playing game, encourages this kind of conflict between players and the DM, then you're pushing the proverbial shit uphill from the start. Sure, you can play that way, but it gets old really fast, because the dungeon master has the ultimate power in that conflict. The main attitude of Duck Quest is that the game doesn't need to make sense, it just needs to make fun. Again, from the same guy. Obviously, you figured that out. And I agree, and I salute, honestly, truly, sincerely salute that that goal and that aim of just fun. I wrote the rules with that in mind, and that way Duck Quest is more connected to Toon, Paranoia, Twerps, and I dare say it, D&D the way we need to play. We used to play, and some still do. Not trying to write a novel here and others. All you need is some friends, pencil. Okay, again, I have said that I think the game is really cool. I think you should, it's a PDF. You should look at getting it and seeing if you couldn't have a good time with it with your group, or a group that you could make up. And not wanting to be the sexist here, in no way, shape, or form, but I would like to point out that this setting is one you might find much more appealing to non-players of either sex. Hey, let's all go be ducks or raccoons or whatever. A lot more fun than trying to get people to, hey, let's go fight stuff with swords. Right? And then a follow-up to that, someone posted on one of my vids that they found being the DM the easiest job compared to players, since players were building the world in front of them by their choices and their character deeds. Yes, that's the way it should be, in my opinion. You can be pretty laid back and still be creative. You can also be fair, but do things your way. Finding the right people to play with is 90% of the game. Well, it's a good chunk. It's a good chunk, a big chunk. Certainly a majority. All right, now we're going to get into another one that goes back to the origins of fantasy writing and fantasy mythology. Why do you think wizards were not capable of using armor and swords, besides game balance reasons? If I was a scrawny wizard, I'd kit myself out in some plate mail and have a halberd if I could. Armor, even plate isn't that heavy. And, okay, well, we'll stop right there. The earliest myths about the Fae, werewolves, vampires, when I say Fae, I mean all the little people, had it that iron was not good for them. If you read the Iron Druid series, iron is not good for other creatures and what have you. It saps their fayness. A wizard has to be at least some fae, have some fae-like skills to be able to manipulate and wield magic. Iron's a damper. Myth after myth, fairy tale after fairy tale, it's there. And it weighed heavily on Gary and Dave when they were, okay, they can do this, they can do that, they can't. When they were sitting down, banging that out, That weighed heavily on them. Now, there have been novels that amplify magic with armor in a bad way. Wearing armor, I mean, come on, let's face it. Any electrical-based spell is going to be a lot more serious if you're running around clad in a tin suit. You're liable to get welded to the floor right where you stand. By the same token, wearing all leather, I would probably diminish the effect of an electrical base spell. Now, if you get hit with a full-on fire lightning bolt, it's going to take a lot of diminishing to get past that. It was part of game balance. It was also salute to a lot of the mythology and stories. And for the reasons you state about what you would do if you were a scrawny magic user, that's why the rules don't let you. It should be hard to progress as a magic user, because when you get to, say, 5th level, you can wield some pretty potent stuff. Whereas a 5th level fighter, he's a pretty good fighter, but all right, now, okay, it takes you longer as a magic user to get there. It should. When you can throw a fireball that toasts everything in a 40 by 40 foot room to a cinder, yeah, that's an enormous amount of power. An enormous amount. Think about it. As for weapons, it takes training to use it properly, but better not to have it than not. No. Now, the one great contradiction to magic users having swords was Tolkien. But all the stuff in Appendix N, other than Tolkien, you'll find that prohibition, that proscription, holds. Let's see, what's next? All right, in a response, their take was, this was a response, a reply. My take on the subject was the elf was able to use both spells and sword. It's a crossroad of being fighter and magic user, somewhere where you... Well, I'm not fond of elves, the way they're allowed to do all sorts of stuff anyway. Yeah, I know they all had, fancy swords and etc. But I'm not real fond of elves as player characters. The idea was lost of change. Elves use short swords and chainmail with spells that help limiting from doing everything. Yeah, well, okay, if that's the way your world wants to work, that's fine. I prefer my world to work the other way. The only iron or steel in that case, if you want to split that hair, that I would allow a magic user to carry would be a knife. Now, that said, I'm not talking about a little eating dagger. You want to have a sax with a 12 or 13-inch blade, that's fine. That was a utility knife. Just a big damn utility knife. Okay, now we got another one that's sort of a long-winded rant and response on that. And I'm going to zip through parts of it. Class-based armor restrictions, as a rule, I find silly and immersion breaking. Well, you're entitled to find it however you want. I do like the archetypes they produce. The unarmored magic user, the plate-wielding fighter, the lightly armored thick rope. In my games, I try to reproduce these archetypes, not through armor proficiency. You don't really need to train extensively to know how to wear a mail or a plate harness. Well, I'll stop you right there and argue that fact. Particularly wearing a chain, especially if it has a coif. Go on YouTube and just Google chainmail, and you will find many, many, many videos on chainmail. Yeah, it's somewhat flexible. It's still 30 pounds dragging on your shoulders. You've got to build up your stamina. You've got to learn what you can flex and what you can't. You do not have full range of motion, because if you did, you'd have to have an opening right there in your armpit, and openings in your armpits are a sure recipe for a sharp, pointy thing being poked in there. Yes, you have to train, at least rudimentarily, on how to use anything other than leathers. And even if you're wearing a boiled cuirass, you're going to have to practice getting what it feels like to have limited inward motion with your arms. Work down those raw spots in your armpits where they rub against the top of the cuirass, or find a padded tunic that you can wear. Yeah, you got to figure out what you got. You'd look like a 12-year-old trooping around in a mail shirt he found, about as effective as, well, not much. You know, sleeves hanging over his hands and the bottom of the shirt down over his knees. And, you know, I don't believe. Now, are there exceptions? Yeah, you can make an exception. You can make up a suit of mithril, magic metal, and give it to a wizard. And if the wizard's got anything going for him at all as a player character, he's going to become the very most potent player character in the group from then on. Once he gets to that stage of catching up, so we say. Not good. Not good. Okay, weapons should be kept simple for people that do not want to do serious training. A spear would be better than a more complex polearm. Well, luckily in my world, I figure out if you find a really nifty polearm and refit it with a new haft and shaft or whatever it's called, haft, I think. You're going to figure out how to wave it around a little bit, and I don't go into going to see Sir Clemens' school for polearm fighting. That's just me. Okay, oh yes. Okay. Now, this is an interesting philosophical point, if you will. Non-lethal, less than lethal, non-looting, non-conquest, and or non-violent player character level advancement. One of the recurring stereotypes of D&D is murder hobo, only seek and destroy, loot and pillage monsters, or disable and avoid formidable traps that surround buried treasure. In my humble opinion, that's really a boring way to look at a fantasy RPG world. Well, there is a response to this that I'll read before I give mine. D&D is rooted in wargaming. That said, murder hobos are simply bandits and will be hunted by the authorities and lynch mobs. It is a poor DM that allows a party to become murder hobos and get away with it. Excellent point. Now, there is a genre that many will argue, with which I'll agree, where being a murder hobo is one of the highest forms of life you can be, and that's in the post-apocalyptic stuff. you and your band of fellow mutants, half mutants, whatever, have banded together to survive in a very hostile environment, and you just about kill everything. He goes, oh, well, it's okay. There's no such thing as alignments in post-apoc. One of the reasons I think it's pretty cool. Just do whatever you want. And hey, okay, yeah, we were murder hobos in that we killed and asked questions later. In the early days, we were exploring a dungeon full of hostile monsters. We killed them and we took their stuff. Now that has remained a staple of all role-playing, whether it's fantasy, science fiction, or post-apocalyptic horror. You kill things and take their stuff, or destroy their stuff, or the point remains. Alright, now I have a rant. Let me preface, I am not singling out this company for what they're trying to do with a Kickstarter. They are a business, they see a need or a market, and they're trying to exploit it, to fill it, to meet that need. A1 capitalism, no problems. However, it is what they are doing that I simply cannot understand nor condone the entire, not that it's for me to condone, but I would harshly scorn the whole concept. How many character classes do we need? I went on Facebook today and asked, I have a lot of gamer Facebook people that see what I write, just how many there were official character classes. And I think the number that I got back was probably pretty low, because there are lots of specials that got added in a series of story adventures, whatever. But anyway, it's probably a low estimate of 40 to 60. I think that's a low estimate if you look at all the permutations that have come since. And I know, I started it. I published a thief, and I published a druid as NPCs. The thief is a PC. The druid is an NPC who quickly became a PC. A partial list. Alchemist, anti-paladin, artificer. Guess they fix shit. Archer, astrologer. Oh, yeah, there's an exciting profession. That goes back to the previous question of how do you advance if you don't go out and kill shit and take their stuff. Well, golly, I guess you could set up so that you become the teacher of all the small children in the Shire. And for every class that you graduate, at least 50% of them without having them kill themselves or be eaten, you get to go up a level. Or perhaps you'd like to be an assayer. See where I'm going? Barbarian, bandit, berserker, bounty hunter. Those four right there are the same thing. It's a form of a fighter. Bureaucrats. Okay, there's a game out for you that want to play a bureaucrat. It's called Papers and Paychecks. And you can you can do double entry until you get to 20th level. Cleric. Hey, I remember that one. Cavalier. Not too sure why there's so many different cavaliers. And I've seen crusaders. And there's a bunch of them. Deathmaster. That's a character class? Holy shit. Duelist. There was a great movie by that name, had Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine in it. But I can't see it having much future as a character class. Gonna get offended everywhere you go and challenge them to a duel? Gypsy. Oh no, yeah, let's be the friendly gypsy in the campaign and steal from everybody. But everybody loves you because you got a charisma of 18. Incantatrix. Apparently that's a female incanter. Incantator. Magic user. Magic user. Jester. I don't know what... How, going back to that previous question, advancement, when you're not out killing things, I guess if you tell some really good original jokes, you could advance. If you want to be a jester, you'd have to determine in advance. Once you declare to be jester, now the guy you're working for, what's his irascibility level? What's his intelligence? What's his charisma? How quick is he to anger? Because hey, surviving a year as a jester in a really irascible, quick to anger guy's court ought to be worth a level or two. I guess you get a bigger inflatable thing to hit people with. A mariner. Okay, that's a fighting man who has some nautical experience or a yearn to learn. A ninja. Oh yeah. We really need ninjas as a class. My God. An accomplished thief striking from behind by surprise is way enough of a game breaker. Ninja, come on. Oracle. Well, that sounds to me like a cleric that likes to sample those shrooms. A paladin. Oh my God, we all hate paladins, don't we? Though they can be useful to the DM if you're using pre-gens, you'd make one of them a paladin and that keeps them somewhat in line. Or you get to watch them bash each other for a while until they get in line. Scribe. Oh yes. At your 400th will or your 350th warrant, you get to go up a level. You get a new quill and a nicer ink bottle. Sentinel. There's a fighting man that's just learned to stand still for long periods of time or to pace in an orderly fashion and stay awake. A smith. Why would you want to play a smith? You want to make horseshoes? You want smithing abilities so you can repair your own weapons? Well, that's horse crap, unless you've got a top quality forge and quality ore and all the other tools, and you sure as hell aren't going to carry those around on your back on the next adventure. A thief acrobat. Well, we always kind of figured thieves were acrobats because they had to have high dexes to begin with. A time lord. Really? A witch. Well, magic user again. This time it's a female. Now the reason I bring this up is if those weren't enough. This goes back to a couple of previous questions tonight about lack of imagination and having to be force-fed or pablum-fed in a spoon. This product, 2 parts, has a total of 22 character classes. I'm presuming new. More than 200 spells. I just can't wrap my head around that one. How nitpicky, how precise, cast fart over in corner. And so they go look over in that corner because they think they smell, farts. 200 more spells. At the risk of sounding like old guard again, when we wanted to do a specific thing, we found the spell that was closest to it and researched a variation on it to produce a specific result. How many that ended up being, I have no idea. It's probably, if more people did it for a long enough time, it could be in the tens of thousands. But they weren't all printed out and made into the law. 220 monsters? This is one of the phenomena that actually puzzles me the most. Why people get bored and need 220 more monsters. Okay, nobody wants to fight orcs and goblins all the time, but eat gods and little fishins. You can take the standards and beef them up, or give them, in your world they do this, you don't care what the book says. My God. I have the most fun when I'm doing outdoor adventures, just making giant, real-life things. Of course, it's fantasy because they're so big. 220 more monsters. That must go with those 200 spells, because one of those spells is infest his or her crotch with a new form of louse that doesn't react to kerosene. A little specific, I'll grant you. 150 more magic items. 150 more magic items. How many hours of adventuring does it take? How many player characters to find 50 different magic items? Unless you're giving them away like a giveaway down at the Sam's Club, it ought to take a lot of aggregate playing hours. And then, of course, rules. Again, if this is your style of play, and I have a feeling that not a whole lot of people that watch this play this way, by all means, go support them. Pledge your money. But I think that the fact that a market for this product even exists is a telltale of the sorry state of fantasy role-playing. This goes back to the thing about a DM shouldn't have to have a 500-page backstory, shouldn't have to have everything all worked out. It should unfold. The player should create the story, and the DM edits along the way. And that's the end of my rant. Yeah, we got 3 inches of snow here today in Cincinnati. Now, when I lived in Wisconsin and we got 3 inches of snow, it was like, oh, okay. And so we drove home 5 or 10 miles an hour slower. In Cincinnati, if they find out they're going to get 2 or more inches of snow, they lose their shit. They immediately run out and load up on toilet paper, bread, and milk. All that milk toast is going to give them the runs, without a doubt. They can't wrap their head around the concept of 3 inches of snow. It was taking 75 minutes to get what's normally a 15-minute run up the interstate this evening. 75 minutes. 5 times normal. Nobody knows how to drive, so they skid off, and that blocks a couple of lanes until they get pushed out of the way, and then somebody skids off somewhere else. Anyway, I like it. I was born in the snow belt in Illinois, and I enjoy snow. Color me crazy. But I also have an all-wheel drive Kona short, small wheelbase. Go where I want. I'm pretty sure. If you're being snowed in, stay in. Don't be silly. Unless you're starving to death and have nothing in the house for the baby to eat, stay the heck home for the next day or two. Dodada Govi.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, a curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, a curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree,
High as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.